Right. Well, I guess that's the... See, I have like a personal interest in politics and ideas and stuff, but I get pretty turned off by the kind of intrigue and the politics of it, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
But I guess it's the nature of the game.
Well, it's the nature of the game because we've allowed it to be. You know,
Right.
One of the challenges is it's funny. Australians have, America, you don't have compulsory voting.
Yeah.
Here we do. But we have a very low percentage of the population involved in political parties.
Mm.
You know, and that's a shame. I was asked at our event at Sydney Uni. Someone asked me, "Oh, you know, they were pro-life, and they're saying we did this, we did what you did, what you suggested we do, Dr. Con. We made our voices known, but where did it get us?" And if you recall, I asked a question. I said, what if those 10,000 people that came to that rally in Hyde Park, what if all of them joined political parties, whether they be Labor Party, Liberal Party, Australia One, you know, join Ricardo, whoever? This would be a far better country. You know, to give you, and this will help you and your listeners, the problem we've got in this country is safe seats. Okay, but by that I mean it's a seat like, say, Mitchell, where I used to live, actually where I live now, which is like the Balkan Hills area.
Yeah.
That's a safe Liberal seat.
Right.
The guy holds it there on a margin of double digits.
Mm.
Okay. He could, short of killing somebody or being,
shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah, or being found in bed with another woman or something like that. Even that maybe. You know, he's going to be in that seat, irrespective of what he does.
Mm.
He could fall asleep in Parliament. I'm not saying he does this, you know. Please don't, you know.
Fred Knoll.
No, the sitting member there is a guy named Alex Hawke. Now, you know, he's quite active. But what I'm saying is because of the nature of the demographics, Alex Hawke could do nothing, okay? And as long as he remained the candidate for the Liberal Party, he would get selected. Now, that's the problem we've got. So if all the seats were marginal seats, where the members had to actually work to make sure that they were elected, okay, like in other words, they couldn't be assured of getting back in. Now, am I saying that someone like Alex Hawke takes for granted? No, I don't think I can say that. But it is a safe seat. It's considered a safe seat. If he was on a margin of 5%, you see the difference?
Mm. So you think if we didn't have compulsory voting, those seats would become more marginal?
No, I think it's good that we have compulsory voting. I think if more people got involved in the political process,
right,
and the people who don't like what Alex Hawke is doing, for example, okay, I'll use a better example. Recent election, Chris Bowen and McMahon got a big swing against him, primary swing of nearly 8%. Okay, a lot of it went to One Nation. Some of it was because of the activity of groups like us, because there was a perception that he wasn't representing his electorate. Okay, he knew his electorate voted no. 2/3 of them voted no in the same-sex marriage debate, and he said, I knew they voted no, and I'm going to vote yes anyway. How do you think it makes people feel? So, if the people in McMahon, more of them join political parties, and let's say 1,000 people in McMahon joined the Liberal Party, and they all turned up on polling day, and they got their mates and their friends to hand out how to votes and things like that. Okay, and only 500 people joined the Labor Party. Do you see that how the dynamics shift? Unfortunately, what tends to happen is the political process is left to a few diehards, okay,
and power brokers.
Or power brokers, but the power brokers reward those who look after them. And it's left to the whole. It's like a kind. Like I'll tell you what happens. They leave school, they go and join a local council, okay, and they'll be able to work part time and also be on council. Council is your kindergarten for your MP.
And they're probably in a university young Liberal Labor club
that's
as
right.
well.
But the key is they go to local council, they get a profile in the community, okay, because they're on council. They get noticed by the state power brokers. Yeah. All right. And then they start their move up, and then they go and after working for council, they go and work as a staffer for a federal MP or a state MP. They'll work in that office for a few years, and they'll be anointed as the successor. Once that state MP decides to leave, then that guy or girl will be tapped and
Yeah.
and just it's just an in crowd. It's nepotism, and it's incestuous because we allow it to be that way. But sorry, I was just going to say, but if 100,000 people across Australia got involved in political parties, the game would be changed substantially.
Now, it seems that like an unattractive proposition to a lot of people to join a political party, or political parties, which a lot of them seem, broken. Like there's probably, I remember my grandfather was quite politically involved, and then particularly under Turnbull, he was part of the Liberal Party. He didn't really want to touch it.
And your dad was in the Liberal Party.
Trying to keep that under wraps. But yeah, so like
edit out.
Edit. We're not part of the I'm not part of a political party. Yeah. I don't really intend to be. Part of the reason is because I feel like I haven't made my mind up on a lot of things. Another reason is because I feel like I don't want my soul to be. I don't want my good intentions to be tarnished by the politics of the whatever. What would you say to the people who have the apprehension about joining a political party because they don't want to get involved in the dirt and muck and grime of the actual...
Yeah, okay, well, I guess what I would say is it's a little bit like, using a medical analogy, it's like a patient who's sick, who's got a fairly advanced illness that's been developing over 20 years. The person's they've got 3 or 4 blocked arteries in their heart because they've been smoking and boozing and haven't been exercising, and they've been eating McDonald's every day for the last 20 years. Okay, that person's not going to be in shape 20-30 years down the track. Okay, they're going to have a lot of problems with their heart. They're going to probably need fairly major open heart surgery. Okay, that has a risk of death, and they're never going to be the same, right? The treatment's going to be pretty radical. A couple of pills isn't going to fix it.
Go to the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, that's right. But a couple of pills isn't going to fix it, right? You're not going to just fix it with a simple solution. So, in a sense, that's where we're at. But here's the thing: if the person doesn't get treated, what's going to happen to them?
They die.
That's exactly right. So we're at a bit of a crossroads now in Australia. We as a society have to decide: are we just going to let the political process continue to rot and become a carcass? And we could say that, but the problem then is that carcass determines the future of the country. Or are we going to do something, as difficult as it might be, and sometimes as distasteful as it might be, to see if we can turn that around and put some proper life back into that carcass? Because whatever you do now, your children and my children and your children's children will suffer the consequences, good or bad. Because, whether we like politics or not, that's our system. And if we don't turn up, I'll give you an analogy. The way I explain it is it's a bit like a game. Okay, and I think I talked about this on Tuesday. You've got 2 teams. One of 2 teams is going to win. Okay, and the prize is you get to run the country. You can have a team that's of poor athletes. They're just uncoordinated. Okay, and they're pretty terrible in terms of their fitness and skill. You have another team that's really athletic, strong, fit and fast, all that stuff. Call them Team A. Team B, call them that's the unfit team, right? Who's going to win the game if Team A don't turn up?
All right, Team B.
Team B. Okay. Who's going to win the game if Team A, as good and as skilled as they are, don't know the rules?
Team B.
Team B. All right. That's what's happened. We've abdicated we've just exited the political process, and I'm as guilty as anyone else. I didn't really get involved. I've been politically aware all my life. I knew what was going on, but it wasn't until 2013 that I became politically active. Okay, so I'm as guilty as anyone else. Okay, but I just decided I'm not going to sit on my backside anymore. And I only got politically active when I was challenged by somebody as to what would happen to my children. So we've abdicated the political process, and that's why the gay lobby or the LGBT lobby, who represent 2% of the population, are so powerful. They've learned the rules of the game, and they turn up to play. Every time there's an election, they're out in force. For example, even during this issue of religious freedom and this exposure draft and all that, because I get their emails, because I like to know what my opposition's doing, right? And they're in Canberra. They know where the politicians have coffee. They know where they go for dinner. And she said this. She said, we've been there, we've been at the restaurants and the coffee shops, we've been talking to the politicians face to face, telling them that we don't want these laws to be made and we don't want religious bigots to be given a sword to bash gay people and all that sort of garbage, right? But they're out there. Now my question is, for those whom religious freedom is an important issue, are they out there as well? Does that make sense? So to answer your question, Dougal, it's up to you. Is the future of your children important to you or not? And if it isn't important to you, then just leave it alone. Let the others, the left and everyone else, continue to wreck the country. If it is important to you, then you've got to find a way to get involved and get active. I'm not a member of a political party personally, because our organisation, we need to work with all of them. But I am, through our efforts, people are joining political parties, and we have links with both major parties to make sure that we get good people in all of them. And I can talk about that if you want me to. Okay, well let's finish up. Your idea is that because there's a broken party, at least New South Wales Liberal Party, that we got a kind of rushed, unfinished, unpopular abortion bill. Yep. You said that has consequences that have led through to a discussion we're going to have on religious freedom. Yep. Do you think Australia has a problem right now with religious freedom? Well, okay. Best way the Ruddock report that was done in 2018 identified that we don't actually have clear legal protections. It's not like we've got anything in the United States, but what the United States have. And that people talk about Section 116 of the Constitution. That is very narrow, applies only to constitutional law. Okay. Best way to explain religious freedom in Australia is, imagine you've got a town or a community, and in the middle of the community there's a reserve, right? And that reserve has been used by the community as a park for decades. And everyone thinks it's a park. Now, there's only one problem. It's not codified, it's not zoned as a park in the council bylaws. Right. So is there anything stopping the council coming and taking that park and turning it into a car park? Anything legal? No. It only exists as a park because the council because no one's taken it away. Well, our religious freedom is a little bit like that. We've enjoyed it over the last few decades or 5 decades, or 10 decades if you want to look at it that way. It's been an assumed freedom, but there's nothing really in law that specifies it. So what does religious freedom mean? Like, when we're actually talking about religious freedom, what is it that needs protection, or what do you have the freedom of? Well, and this only really became an issue with same-sex marriage. Okay, and I'm not saying that same-sex marriage is the cause of the problem. No, same-sex marriage just highlighted the problem. It highlighted the fact that there's no, there's no clear legal zoning of religious freedom of the park, for example, because it boils down to to a clash of rights. Okay, basically you've given one group of people the right to same-sex couples the right to marry, the positive right to marry. The problem is there's a very big group of people over here who's Jews, Muslims and Christians, whose scriptures, now put aside whether you believe in those scriptures or not, okay? But their scriptures are very clear. They call homosexuality an abomination. They call it a sin, okay? I don't care whether don't get upset with me for that. I didn't write them, okay? So can you see the problem? You got and how many? What percentage of the population we're talking about there? We're talking. But surely the right, your rights can't extend to somebody else's actions. No. But what I'm saying is they need to have the right to speak what their scriptures say. just as you know, I accept that same-sex couples can have the right to marry now, even though I don't agree with it. Okay, but they need to also accept my right to say that, well, I don't agree with that lifestyle. Okay, without taking me to tribunals or courts or things like that. Israel Folau should never have been taken to, you know, it shouldn't have ever ended up that way. Now, whether we can debate as to whether rugby were stupid in the handling of the case, okay, but the fact is, all he did was paraphrase 1 Corinthians 6:9 to 11. Okay, he didn't say that that I hate gay people. Okay, he said this is what the Bible says about it, and he should have the right to say that. One of the Muslim clerics that I've defended with Mark Latham, like, because Mark and him got into a bit of a, and I said he's done exactly the same thing as Folau. Sheikh Shadi basically said that homosexuality is condemned by the Quran and leads to AIDS and diseases, which it does. Okay, that's the facts. I know no one wants to talk about that, but they're the facts. So we need a society where the religious person can articulate what their religion says, okay, and the non-religious person can articulate what their views are, and those statements are not discrimination. It's not discrimination for me to say that I believe that marriage should be between a man and a woman. That's not discrimination. Okay, and I shouldn't have to face anti-discrimination laws for that. All right, and it's not discrimination for someone to say, look, I just think Christianity is a lot of bollocks. You know, I think we just all evolved from amoeba. That's fine.
Sure. Well, I mean, we on this channel usually would describe ourselves as kind of free speech extremists. Like, I'm very happy to be called, like, for the white male to be called the cause of the world issues. You know, according to anyone, like that's fine as long as I get to say, you know, whatever. Yes. And you know, by protecting their right to say that, I'm also protecting my own right to my own opinions. So I'm fully on board with you there. I think whether what we say, whether what Folau said was very nice, I think is a different question. I don't think it was very nice in the sense that, I mean, if you looked at the post in the big capital letters that like hell awaits you on the bottom, I was like, well, that's a bit unnecessary. But I think he's well within his rights to say it. At the same, it is a weird question though, because I also think that, like, I also think companies should usually have the rights to kind of do whatever they want usually. Like, the contract is like, the company's like, I like you do this work, and they're like, I'll do this work.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily a status quo, because there's labour laws and all these different things. I like the idea of companies being able to kind of choose who they want to work and when, and not being able to associate with the person. But I'm dribbling, as I have a tendency to dribble. Yeah. What's your reaction to kind of the company versus worker and religious discrimination?
I think that I like Mark Latham's take on this. Companies don't own what you do when you're not working for the company. Okay, and I think any contract where I mean, you could argue that if it's written in a contract, you're bound, and yes, you are if you sign it, but you shouldn't sign it. Okay, we had this dispute with the doctors with APRA a year ago, where they tried to make a code of conduct that said that any that a doctor who said something that was different to the mainstream profession, okay, online or in public or whatever, could be guilty of misconduct. And there was an uproar about it, and rightly so. So they had to pull their head in. So I think if you're working, okay, like for example, okay, let's use the Israel Folau thing. If Israel Folau got up while he was wearing a Australian Rugby Australia jersey, if he was at a Rugby Australia function, or if he was there, obviously if he was at the end of a game or something like that, and he said something to an interviewer about it, he shouldn't say that, because he's there working for his employer. Okay, but what I do in my own time, okay, on my own private, if I'm on social media, is not my employer's business, right? And it needs to stay that way, because otherwise we end up being Mark Latham compares it to the feudal system. Okay, your employer doesn't own you away from the workplace. That I think that for me is the bottom line.
Sure, I understand that, but I think, like, if you think about what is a law, what would that law kind of entail? It's like, let's say the company fires a person for something they do away from home, or away from the workplace. Like, if you had the law that kind of protected the worker in that sense, what it seems like that would actually mean, it would mean like fines or serious like legal penalties for the employer. And I'm not convinced that that like a company or like let's say like a small business owner or whatever, let's say they decide to fire an employee based on whichever arbitrary reason they choose to, should face the fines or even more serious legal penalties.
So it depends what you see. If we're talking about, again, it's something that's got to be discussed in context and in situation specific, because what are you talking about what an employer does? If an employer just verbalizes what their faith says, that's one thing. If an employer writes on social media that my boss is an asshole, sorry, I shouldn't say that on, but if my bosses are this or that, right, that's different. Okay. Now, I don't think anybody would begrudge a company taking action on somebody who where their brand was damaged or things like that. People will argue that isn't that what Qantas did, or isn't that what Rugby Australia did because Folau was. I would argue differently. I would say he was in his own time, okay, and he wasn't. There was no. He didn't have any type of wallaby motif or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we have to find a common ground, that where and that's the complex thing with these religious discrimination laws. The government's going to have to find, okay, when does a company suffer a justifiable hardship and it justifies sacking. One of the good things about Mark Latham's bill is that he specifies that secondary boycotts and things like that don't satisfy that test.
Sure. I think the only thing I'd push back on, I just kind of think that an employer should kind of have the freedom to hire and fire whoever they want, almost basically for whatever reason. Like my kind of, this might just be a silly thing that I'm saying, but I'm going to flesh this out a little bit more. Yeah. Let's say like an employer hates smoking, for instance, and he doesn't want anyone in his company to smoke. Like that's kind of arbitrary. Like smoking's legal. Like nobody cares if you smoke at the bar. Like I've prone to an occasional one myself. But if an employer decides like irrationally, let's say irrationally, that he's going to fire you because you found out you were smoking, like should that employer go and face like tribunals and stuff? Like I'm not convinced.
And see, it depends. Philosophically, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree that an employer should have but we don't live in a purely philosophical world. We live in a world that's governed by a legal framework. Okay, and so if they're going to be frameworks that govern what employers do, they have to also be frameworks that govern what employees do. If you're going to give and this is why the politicians were warned specifically about same-sex marriage, because it was such you have to have some kind of balance for people that disagree. I guess and you can extrapolate it to anything. Whenever you've got something where there's such a dichotomy of views, abortion's one, euthanasia's one, same-sex marriage is one, and it could be anything. Okay, but if we're going to live in a civil society, there has to be a mechanism that accommodates that dichotomy. If you give too much weight to one side, you end up creating lawfare. And the only winners out of that are the lawyers. They're laughing all the way to the bank, right? Whereas if you have equal sort of power in terms of those rights, in other words, you don't have a positive right for one and a negative right for the other, then you get much less lawfare, because the person who's thinking about taking someone to court looks at the laws on the other side and says, oh, well, I might not. You know what I'm saying? You choose your fights if the other guy can fight. If he can't fight you...
Well, that's they say. There's no war's ever been declared on a country that has a nuclear bomb.
That's right. And and maybe if I can talk a little bit about the ACA and sort of...
Sure.
And I think... Because you were also going to ask me about the CDP at some point.
Sure. Well, look, to be fair, I'm enjoying it. I'm happy to go. I'm happy to go.
No, I'm happy to go too.
Well, let's finish this. Let's finish this religious freedom thing.
Yes.
So, you're playing some advisory role or trying to encourage the government to pursue a religious freedom bill that accomplishes what objectives?
Well, okay. I guess I'm working with different religious groups, and I'm trying to do two things. Firstly, I'm trying to bring together an alliance of different religious groups, where basically, and we've got a name, it's the Australian Religious Alliance. Okay, it's not formal. We haven't formalised anything as yet, but I'm wanting to bring everybody around the table so that when there are issues that affect all of us as religious organisations, we can work together. Okay, rather than fighting each other. Okay, if there's a common enemy, we're better off united rather than divided. And I've been amazed at the level of support for that. You know, I've got very good relations with the national Jewish bodies, the Sunni Muslim, the Shia Muslim, the different Christian denominations, Orthodox, Catholic. It's great. And so bringing the groups together was the first objective, and the purpose of that was to find the best solution, the best fit of an imperfect law, because unfortunately this should have been done before they legalised same-sex marriage. Now that it's been done, it's a bit like trying to unscramble an egg. Now, are we going to get something that everybody's happy with? No. It's going to be very difficult for the Attorney General, because he's got one group yelling in this ear that the laws go too far, then he's got us yelling in the other ear that no, they don't go far enough. So how does he satisfy, with the one law, when one group wants white, the other group wants black? We don't want grey. No, neither group wants grey. If he gives the white to the white group, he pisses off the black group, etc. So what I'm trying to do is find out, okay, working with the different groups, what are the things that we're not going to negotiate? Because there'll come a point when we say that, and this was echoed by a Labor politician I had a meeting with on Thursday. She said, we're better off with no law, in other words, keeping the situation we have, rather than legislating a bad law and then having to have all these legal cases and then amendments in 1 or 2 years' time to fix that. So we're working now to work out, okay, what are the things that we must have in this bill? Then we'll go to the government and see if they'll give us that. And if they won't, then I guess we'll all call, let's just can the whole thing.
What are the things you're looking for from the government?
Well, I think I've got a whole list of them, but I'll just keep them simple, and I'll keep a couple of, just so you can get the idea. I think we need to, what we were looking for is clear recognition that statements of belief are not discrimination. Okay, and if I verbalise my belief and I upset somebody who's LGBT, they've just got to gut it up. Okay, if that's my belief, and I'm not saying that gays should be stoned or gays should be lynched, or we should, I should throw Muslims under the bus, or let's organise just different beliefs, because in the alliance, for example, I told the Muslims, look, we don't agree theologically, but I'll help you.
Sure. But let's say you've got Muslim. I don't know much about Christian theocracies. I don't know much about Islamic theocracies either. But let's say Muslim, the statement of belief, the punishment for apostasy is death. Let's say, for example.
So I should clarify something. That statements of belief that don't contravene Australian civil or criminal law. So one of the straw, your listeners may be familiar with the idea of a straw man. In arguments. Okay, a straw man argument is the religious freedom laws will usher in Sharia law. No, they won't. Okay, because many aspects of Sharia law contravene Australian civil law. You can't marry more than one person. Child marriage is illegal, and things like that. So we're not going to be ushering that in. So I want everyone to understand, whenever I'm talking about religious freedom or statements of belief, it's assuming it doesn't contravene the civil or criminal law. Okay. If I'm saying something that contravenes that, then of course I should be liable for the punishment for that saying. So, for example, if I'm saying that, if I'm inciting a group of guys, look, let's go and get our KKK stuff on, and let's go down to Bankstown and beat up some pull the headscarves off Muslim women, and let's just beat them up. That I should be prosecuted for. Okay, and even if I said because God commanded it, okay, I should be guilty for that, because that's incitement of violence and all that. But me saying that God made people male and female, and Romans 1 and 1 Corinthians 6:9 says that that different people like, and that passage doesn't single out gay people. It talks about drunkards and adulterers and swindlers and fornicators and whatever. Me saying that according to the Bible, those people will end up in hell, I shouldn't have to be prosecuted for that, because all I'm saying is so that's one thing. Statements of belief are not discrimination, and I think that.
Sorry, Quinn, can I ask you one more question on this? I don't know much about the law, but if it's a protection against false statements that don't kind of cross civil law, is it?
Civil and criminal.
Civil and criminal. Is that like a tricky thing to kind of clarify, considering like we might have like 18C or like does that count? I'm spitballing here.
Yeah, no, 18C is related but slightly different. 18C, and that's a problem too, because
18C is where you can get like in trouble for offending. Is it offending someone?
Assault and offend. Insult or offend. And it's the Racial Discrimination Act, and that's the kind of language that I want to see in this bill either. Yeah. I think the problem with so a couple of things I want to see. So it's statements of belief. We talked about that. I want to get rid of this idea of insult or offend.
Yeah.
Okay, because are we going to create a generation of snowflakes? I mean, the bottom line is that life is difficult. People are going to offend you, and you just got to accept it, and you got to gut it up. And if you're going to go around crying and having a dummy spit every time someone offends you, I mean, you're just going to get nowhere in life. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why I think Jordan Peterson has been so successful, because he's been one of the few people that's been willing to call that out and saying, guys.
And he says when you're pursuing truth, you're going to risk offending people.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we need to get rid of this idea of it's insult or offend, for not just because of that, but because it's also very, how do you define it? Like I've even asked, because my Muslim brothers keep bringing up this idea of hate speech. Now, no one to date has been able to tell me what hate speech is.
It's not a thing.
It is. It's right. It can't be measured.
There's definitely hateful things that people say, but hate speech is not a thing you can box up and put into a law.
But if I say I hate chocolate, is that hate speech?
Yeah, well that's the thing, right? It's like it doesn't exist as a political thing,
and it can't be measured. And so in the same way, insult or offend, it's too subjective.
Yeah.
And it's too vacuous. That's why when people talk about incite violence, okay, I can measure that. Okay, I can measure that what you said and what's the likelihood that would have led or did lead to people taking up arms and things like that. But insult or offend, so I want to get rid of that kind of language. We're going to make it tighter and more clearly defined, and stuff that's more geared to the real world, because people are going to be insulted or offended, and you just got to... I mean, every guy that's had a girl say to him, you ask her out, and she say, bugger off, loser.
Yeah.
I mean, is he going to take her to court because she's insulted or offended him?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
I mean, it's part of Australian culture is to insult and offend your friends, I think, as well.
Absolutely. So, I mean, what happens then if you have a bit of a snowflake in the group?
Some of the best people of all time have been lynched for being offensive. Socrates and... Yes. Galileo and Copernicus and Charles Darwin among them.
Yes.
You can't. A lot of times there's going to be mean people who say mean things, and like, right, we don't. That's not very good. But as soon as you put that into law, I think it's like, right, you're probably going to get rid of all the best guys.
Well, that's right. I mean, how can you? Is that you can't legalize against bad behaviour. That's what parents are supposed to do. Right? Parents are supposed to raise their children and explain what's right and what's wrong. And okay, we can get into another discussion as to how difficult that is. I mean, I've got children. But it's not up to governments to legalise that sort of stuff.
Sure. Well, I don't think governments are particularly good examples of morality, usually, either.
That's exactly right. So
there's probably not many people I'd trust less than the government to tell me what's the good thing to do.
And so... going back to our Muslim brothers, one of them asked me, why am I doing this alliance? Why am I putting this alliance together? I said to him very simply, I said, I want the right to teach my children what I believe. I want you the right to teach. I want you to have the right to teach your children what you believe. And when they're adults, let them debate each other, and may the best man win. So
for sure. Well, I'd love to be able to talk to one of the sheikhs. Maybe we can organise that, or one of the Muslim leaders. I don't know if they come on, but
they might. I'll talk to them.
We'll see if we can pull a few strings.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll see if we can cover that as developments come out.
Yes.
Do you have a time frame? What you're looking at?
Well, it's difficult to say because everything has been kept under wraps, and that's another thing that's wrong about this process. It's a little bit like the abortion bill. Things are, we just don't know. My guess is that because there are only a couple of weeks, there are only 3 sitting weeks left in for Parliament for the year. There's 2 weeks in November. There's 1 week in December. They will either the first sitting week or the second sitting week in November. They'll release the bill. It will go through the House of Representatives. But the problem is there's not going to be enough public debate and discussion about it. So I think they'll be making a very big mistake if they try to rush it through. I personally think they should slow it down. And anybody who's listening and you want to contact your federal members, especially those in the Liberal Party, please do so and tell them to slow it down. So we've at least got time to analyse this bill, time to go through it and see, where the fine print is. Because that's the problem, isn't it? It's always the fine print that gets you.
And that's where the politicians make their buck.
That's right.
That's where the dark money comes in.
That's right. So there's nothing, and the other problem the other thing I don't want to see is if they do get it through the end of this year, they'll go to the Senate. The Senate's going to say, we need to put it to a committee, Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee. That'll call for submissions, public submissions. For the last 2 years, we've been doing public submissions in January because of these committees, and I think people are sick of it. Just give us a holiday. I'm telling the politicians we're happy to work hard and give you the information you need, but for crying out loud, let's have Christmas in peace without having to without having to worry about, because everybody's away for these submissions, and then the senators make their decisions based on the submissions, and if they don't get many because everyone's away, how is that a fair reflection of at least with the abortion bill, it was in August, so everyone was around. Maybe I can what we're doing, the organisation, the Australian Christian Alliance, just so people know who we are.
Let's introduce. So you're the president and founder of the Australian Christian Alliance. The Facebook page description for the Australian Christian Alliance says, a group of Christians who are dissatisfied with the Australian left-wing anti-Christian policies, laws and propaganda. What would you say that's a good summation, or would you add to that, or how would you say that the Australian Christian Alliance is? I
would say that's how we came to be. That's a good way to start. The mission statement for the ACA, because I thought about that and for a little while before we sort of incorporated. Our mission statement is to educate, empower and enlist people to bring Christ back into the political process. So what we want to do is we want to help people, to educate people about the political process, to empower them, to show them actually they can get involved, all right, and they can do something beyond just petitions, those online petitions that really don't achieve much. I can tell you, politicians, unless they're 200,000, 300,000, a million, politicians largely ignore them. Right? And then we want to enlist those. So those that say, look, I'd like to do something, we can show them, okay, these are the pathways you have. Even though we're an alliance of Christians, we're working with all faiths, and we're even working with people who aren't Christians, and even people who aren't religious. Some of the people at that meeting on Tuesday night came up to me and said they weren't religious, but they believed in freedom of religion.
Mark's not religious,
exactly.
Is he? Mark Latham, and he's spoken at three of our first public event that we had in March of this year before the state election. Mark was the speaker, and he's a great guy. He understands the contribution that religious people have made and have to make, because whether you like it or not, religion gives people a value system. And for the majority of religions, okay, we can put aside things like Satanism and the flying spaghetti monster. But if you look at the majority of the big religions, they do give people a moral framework, and people with a moral framework are better than people without a moral framework. And so whether you can agree with the framework or not is another matter. But at least, and I think Mark recognises that a lot of the good the St Vincent de Paul Society, St Vincent's Hospital, a lot. They all started as religious organisations. The universities,
I don't know if you know your history, but in medieval times up to the Renaissance, the universities were started by churches. So religion has a great contribution it can make to this country, provided that people who are in those religions have the right. I guess they want the right things. I'm not for agendas and pushing someone's political agenda. No. And speaking of Mark, on the 30th of November, we'll be having another public event in Fairfield, and you can put the links in your...
Put the link in the description.
Where we're having 5 MPs this time, state and federal, talking about religious freedom.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good. I'm sure if you're interested, you can go and check out the event.